In February 1986, the Philippines stood at one of the most critical turning points in its history. Years of oppression, corruption, and poverty had become unbearable. Ferdinand Marcos and his wife Imelda had held power for nearly 3 decades. During their reign, the country underwent great change, but in the shadows of that change, hunger, fear, and anger festered. For the Marcos family, Malacañang Palace was not just a seat of power, it was the pinnacle of opulence, a monument to their grandeur. Behind its walls stood gold-plated furniture, massive chandeliers, priceless paintings brought from around the world, and vaults filled with jewels. But outside those walls, the people struggled with hunger. Children died from malnutrition, and hope seemed out of reach. This contradiction had been hidden for years by propaganda and fear, but by 1986, it could no longer be concealed. The people flooded the streets. Step by step, the nation moved toward a revolution. This revolution would go down in history as the People Power Revolution. Millions filled the streets of Manila with banners, prayers, and songs. Women stood in front of tanks, priests prayed hand in hand with soldiers, and students marched with fearless voices. Together, they became one sound: Marcos, resign! The world watched live on television as this peaceful but determined uprising unfolded. Yet behind the thick walls of Malacañang Palace, a woman seemed oblivious to the fury outside: Imelda Marcos. Imelda had long been known for her beauty, her obsession with luxury, and her flamboyant style. She had risen from poverty to marry Ferdinand Marcos and become the most powerful woman in the country. At first, the people saw her as a shining star, but as years passed, her extravagance turned into a symbol of shame, a glaring reminder of the hunger in the streets. For Imelda, luxury was not just pleasure, it was a performance, a demonstration of power. Every banquet was staged like theater, every gown chosen like a crown, every jeweled necklace a declaration. But in February 1986, her stage was collapsing. As the revolution spread, panic seeped into the palace. Telephones rang endlessly. Generals began abandoning Marcos one by one. The army was divided, and even the U.S. government had accepted that the regime was finished. A secret message arrived at the palace: "Leave now, or the people will drive you out." It struck the halls like lightning. Ferdinand Marcos was frail, ill, and exhausted. Imelda, however, clung to denial. She touched up her makeup, gathered her jewels, and ordered her silk gowns packed. To her, this was not an escape. It was a battle to preserve her splendor. Chaos erupted. Gold bars were dragged from vaults, diamond necklaces and emerald crowns hurriedly stuffed into cases. Priceless paintings were rolled up and tied with ropes. Servants and soldiers carried heavy trunks, their eyes filled with unease. Imelda shouted, "Do not leave these behind. They are my life." Yet deep down, many of those handling the treasures knew the truth. These riches were stolen from the people. Time was running out. And thousands of pairs of shoes, the world-famous collection, had to be left behind. Imelda stood once more before her towering shoe cabinets. 3,000 pairs of luxury footwear amassed while her people starved. On her face appeared an unforgettable expression, the anguish of losing vanity, mixed with the fury of surrender. Just after midnight, the low rumble of engines filled the sky. U.S. military helicopters descended quietly into the palace gardens. For the Marcos family, this was salvation, but also the moment of greatest humiliation. The palace corridors echoed with hurried footsteps, sobs of servants, the clatter of crates against marble floors. Ferdinand turned weakly to his generals and whispered, "We built this nation. Is this how it ends?" Imelda answered coldly, "If we survive, everything can begin again." The family was rushed into the helicopters. Valises crammed with jewelry, bundles of cash, gold bars, and fine garments were loaded alongside them. As the aircraft lifted into the night sky, the chants of millions rose from the streets. "Marcos, resign! The shouts pierced even the roar of the engines. From her window, Imelda looked down one last time at the palace. That building, once the center of fear and magnificence, was now destined to be remembered as the symbol of collapse. At dawn, the people stormed the palace gates. What they found shocked the world. Gold-plated bathrooms, wardrobes filled with silk gowns, vaults of diamonds, and, most memorably, thousands of shoes in the basement. For the Filipino people, those shoes were not just fashion. They were the physical embodiment of greed in the face of their suffering. International newspapers splashed the images across front pages. Imelda Marcos's name became forever tied not just to politics, but to excess and corruption. The Marcos family was flown into exile in Hawaii. They carried tons of gold, millions of dollars in jewels, and secret documents. But what they left behind was far greater: the trust of a nation. For the Filipino people, that night was not just the flight of a family, it was the end of an empire. Years later, Imelda would speak of that night differently. To her, it had been a temporary absence, but to the people, it was liberation. The night of escape was not simply the downfall of rulers, it was the rebirth of a nation. Imelda's jewels, gowns, and shoes are now relics of history. But her name remains one of the most controversial, a constant reminder of how power, when paired with vanity, can crumble overnight. The escape of the Marcos family was not just an ending. It was a lesson etched into the memory of generations, that even the grandest stage collapses when the voices of the people rise.